The following report is based entirely on official police statements, indictments, and verified court filings from St. Louis County, Missouri, as of November 2025. All persons charged with a crime are presumed innocent unless, and until proven guilty in a court of law. October 29, 2025. In the muted echo of the St. Louis County Justice Center, a clerk's voice carried through the chamber as three names were read into record: Lavor Harmon, Anthony L. Young, and Anthony D. Young. Three relatives bound by blood and, prosecutors say, by a plan to silence a father. The indictments listed the charges with the precision of cold law. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of armed criminal action, 1 count of tampering with evidence, 1 count of knowingly exploding or burning, and for Harmon alone, statutory rape and multiple counts of statutory sodomy. Outside the courthouse, Ferguson Police Chief Troy Doyle stood before reporters. His words were deliberate. This was calculated, cruel, and personal. One of the most senseless acts of violence this region has seen this year. The victims' names were read: Kcoree Warren, the father who had reported the rape of his teenage daughter, and Andrew Klaus, the man investigators believe was hired to kill him and later killed himself. For the first time since that July evening, the narrative of what happened in a quiet Ferguson neighborhood was laid out in legal form. It was not conjecture now. It was evidence. Affidavits, shell casings, burned remains of vehicle, cell tower records, and a story of intimidation that ended with 2 deaths. Each of the accused was ordered held on a $2 million bond. Harmon was booked into St. Louis County Jail. The Youngs, already in federal custody on unrelated charges, were transferred under detainer. Their attorneys offered no immediate comment. Prosecutors clarified that, while the killings were the hallmarks of murder for hire, that specific charge had not yet been filed. Further evidence could support it. The lead prosecutor told the press. That part of the investigation remains active. For Warren's friends, the indictments were both validation and torment. They had waited more than 3 months for names, for charges, for any sense that the system had noticed what was taken from them. Now, hearing those indictments spoken aloud brought the first taste of justice and reopened every wound. Across the street from the courthouse, a small crowd held candles. They said his name quietly, Kcoree Warren, as if afraid that speaking it too loudly might disturb the fragile progress of the case. One sign read, "A father who did the right thing." To understand why his death reverberated far beyond that block of Ferguson, you have to go back, before the indictments, before the gunfire, to the moment one father decided to tell the truth. Before the headlines, before the courtroom lights and microphones, Kcoree Warren was simply a father in Ferguson, Missouri, a man who worked hard, kept his yard neat, and looked after his children. He wasn't a public figure, not a man seeking conflict or recognition. But in late spring 2025, his name would become one that police and prosecutors would repeat again and again, tied to a story that forced the community to confront what courage costs. It began when Warren's teenage daughter, whose identity remained protected under state law, told him something no parent ever wants to hear. She said she had been sexually assaulted by a man she knew, a man the family had once trusted, Lavor Harmon. In most cases, the statistics are cruelly predictable. Families hesitate, fearing backlash, disbelief, or retaliation. Many never report. But Kcoree Warren did. He walked into the Ferguson Police Department and made a formal report, providing a clear, detailed statement. He told investigators what his daughter had said, and he insisted they take it seriously. The case was assigned to a special victims unit, and soon after, Harmon was charged with statutory rape and multiple counts of sodomy. It was the start of a process that, to anyone who's lived through it, is exhausting. Police interviews, depositions, court filings, medical examinations, all the bureaucratic friction that comes with trying to make the justice system care about one child. But Warren didn't waver. Friends said he was steady, quiet, but firm. He'd show up to work, finish his shift, then head straight to appointments with detectives and victim advocates. When his daughter needed to testify in preliminary hearings, he was there, seated in the front row. And yet, people around him noticed a change. He had become more cautious. One neighbor recalled seeing him checking the locks on his door twice before bed. Another said he'd mentioned getting strange phone calls, people asking questions about the case that they shouldn't have known. Then came the offers. According to court filings, Harmon's relatives, his uncle Anthony L. Young and his cousin Anthony D. Young, approached Warren with a bribe. They offered $12,000 in exchange for his silence, hoping he would withdraw his daughter's statement or stop cooperating with prosecutors. For a man living modestly in a working-class neighborhood, that kind of money could have erased bills, eased pressure. But to Warren, it was an insult. He turned it down flat. He told one friend later, "I can't put a price on my child's pain." And with that refusal, the quiet, steady life of a Ferguson father began to dissolve into something darker. In hindsight, investigators believe that was the moment the line was crossed. When the bribe failed, the plan changed. In the days leading up to July 8, 2025, cell phone data, recovered texts, and witness accounts would later place Harmon and both Youngs in conversation with an associate named Andrew Klaus, a man with a history of violent offenses, already known to local police. Prosecutors say it was Klaus who agreed to do what they would not risk doing themselves. He would handle the problem. He would silence the father who wouldn't be bought. At the time, no one outside their circle knew what was being planned. To neighbors, the Warren home still looked ordinary. Kids in the yard, a man washing his car, porch lights on at night. But within that calm, something unseen was closing in. It's a pattern that investigators say they've seen before. Threats that start as whispers, a bribe that becomes a demand that turns into a plan. In early July, Warren told a friend that he was ready to get through court and put it all behind us. He believed the system would protect him. He trusted the process. But the system he believed in wasn't ready for how far his daughter's abuser and his family were willing to go to stop him. On the evening of July 7th, the day before the shooting, Warren spoke with a relative on the phone. They talked about plans for the weekend, maybe a family cookout. There was no hint of fear in his voice. If he suspected danger, he didn't show it. But the next night, a sound shattered the quiet of the street. The crack of gunfire, 5 rounds cutting through glass, the echo swallowed by the humid Missouri air. By the time police arrived, Kcoree Warren was gone. His death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message, one that investigators would soon unravel piece by piece. In every murder case, detectives look for motive, the why behind the violence. In the killing of Kcoree Warren, that answer was clear from the start. Someone wanted him silent. After the shooting, Ferguson police sealed off the block. Evidence markers stretched from the shattered front door across the walkway. Officers retrieved 5 spent shell casings, each fired through the glass pane. There were no signs of forced entry, no burglary, no theft. Whoever came to that door came for one reason, to end the life of the man inside. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood through the night. It didn't take long for them to hear the whispers. People talked about Warren's bravery, how he'd reported a rape that others might have buried. Then someone mentioned the rumors that he'd been offered money to drop the case, that someone had tried to buy his silence. When detectives traced the case file back to its origins, they saw the name Lavor Harmon, charged weeks earlier with sexually assaulting Warren's teenage daughter. Harmon's arrest had split the community. Some called for justice. Others refused to believe it. And beneath the surface, investigators now realized there had been pressure, illegal pressure, to make it all go away. Over the next several days, detectives reconstructed a web of communication between Harmon, his uncle Anthony L. Young, and cousin Anthony D. Young. According to court filings, those messages showed a pattern. Discussions about getting rid of the problem, keeping him quiet, and getting someone to handle it. It was a kind of coded language police see when intimidation crosses into conspiracy. Then came the money. The bribe offer, $12,000 in cash, came from the Youngs, acting, prosecutors allege, on Harmon's behalf. Investigators later found that the funds were withdrawn in smaller amounts from multiple accounts to avoid detection. That detail, prosecutors said, showed intent, a calculated attempt to make the transaction untraceable. But the offer never reached its goal. Warren refused outright. His rejection, relayed to Harmon's relatives, changed everything. From that point forward, the tone of the conversations darkened. Prosecutors say the defendants began reaching out to a fourth man, Andrew Klaus, an associate with a history of armed offenses and a reputation for doing favors. Klaus was not family, but he was known to them. The prosecution alleges he was enlisted to commit the shooting. Phone records later placed Klaus near Harmon's residence in the days before the murder. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed his vehicle following a car registered to one of the Youngs. Those were the first breadcrumbs of a trail that would expose the entire plot. Meanwhile, life at the Warren home continued quietly. His daughter was preparing for court testimony. Neighbors say they saw her helping her father unload groceries that week. He seemed tired but hopeful. He told me they were almost to the worst of it. One friend told investigators. He thought once the case went to trial, they could breathe again. He never made it to that trial. After the killing, detectives would learn that the meeting between conspirators happened days before. Harmon, the Youngs, and Klaus allegedly met at a home in North County, where the plan was finalized. According to prosecutors, they discussed payment, timing, and disposal of evidence, even what to do if police traced the weapon back to them. It was as methodical as it was reckless. The deal was straightforward. Klaus would carry out the shooting, and once Warren was dead, the assault charges would effectively collapse without a key witness. Harmon could then claim the entire case was fabricated, but there was one problem no one could predict. The killers would turn on each other. Within hours of Warren's death, Andrew Klaus was also dead, found shot in St. Louis City. Prosecutors say the same family who paid him killed him to erase the final link, and then tried to destroy the evidence by burning a vehicle believed to have been used in both shootings. The act was brazen but sloppy. Witnesses saw the car engulf in flames. Forensic investigators later recovered melted fragments consistent with firearm residue. That discovery, coupled with cell phone pings placing the suspects near both murder scenes, tied the two crimes together. To prosecutors, the story was now complete. A man reports the rape of his daughter. He refuses to be bribed. He is shot through his own door. The hired gun is then killed the same night to bury the truth. The web unraveled piece by piece until only the architects remained, Harmon and the Youngs. By August, their names were already in police files. By September, detectives had enough to bring the case to prosecutors. And by October 29th, 2025, a grand jury handed down the indictments that would send shockwaves through the region. But before those indictments, before the press conferences in the courtroom, came a night that changed everything. The evening air over Ferguson, Missouri, was still and heavy. Streetlights cast a faint yellow glow along Lang Drive as the neighborhood settled into its summer rhythm. Inside his home, Kcoree Warren was with his children. The same home where weeks earlier he had resolved to see justice served for what had happened to his daughter. Shortly before 9 that night, that promise was shattered. The front door's glass exploded inward under a burst of gunfire. Neighbors later told police they heard a quick succession of shots, 4, maybe 5, echoing through the block. The sound rolled away into silence, and then came the cries. When first responders entered the home, Warren was found collapsed near the entryway, struck multiple times. His children were inside. They had seen him fall. The front storm door was blown through with holes, the shards scattered across the living room floor. Nothing was stolen, no drawers overturned, no sign of a struggle. Whoever had come to that house knew exactly why they were there and what they wanted to accomplish. In the investigation that followed, detectives found .40 caliber shell casings on the walkway and near the steps. The shooter had fired from close range, each round traveling through the same pane of glass. The tight grouping of the shots told investigators the killer hadn't panicked. They were composed and deliberate. Neighbors described seeing figures running through yards, disappearing into the darkness toward a waiting car. One said the vehicle was a gray sedan. That detail would later prove critical. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured that same type of car heading toward Lang Drive minutes before the shooting and speeding away just after. The registration number was partially visible. Investigators traced it to an associate named Andrew Klaus, a man already known to local law enforcement for violence and weapons charges. By the next morning, police had connected that gray car, the shell casings and cell phone data that placed Klaus near Warren's home at the time of the killing. But the story didn't end there. A few hours after Warren's murder, another call reached police in St. Louis. A vehicle burning in a side street. A man inside shot to death. The victim was Klaus. The second crime scene told investigators what they needed to know. The shooter who had silenced Warren had been silenced himself. Fragments of a handgun grip were recovered from the charred wreckage, and residues in the vehicle matched the same .40 caliber ammunition used at Warren's house. A witness in the area described seeing two men near the vehicle just before it caught fire, one of them resembling a member of a young family. The murders, hours apart, were now clearly connected. Detectives followed the digital trail backward. Calls between Lavor Harmon, Anthony L. Young, Anthony D. Young, and Klaus in the days and hours leading up to both shootings. Patterns emerged, brief messages, sudden location pings moving together, devices switching off minutes before the attacks. The timeline prosecutors later presented was chilling in its simplicity. Harmon, already charged with raping Warren's teenage daughter, wanted the witness out of the way. His relatives, the Youngs, handled logistics and money. Klaus was recruited to carry out the shooting. The promise of payment ended with his death before the night was over, his car torched to erase evidence. For the Warren family, there was no warning, no chance to prepare. The man who had refused a $12,000 bribe, who had placed faith in the courts, was gone in seconds. His children were left standing in the same doorway where their father had made his last stand for truth. In the following days, the quiet residential block became a corridor of flashing lights and unmarked cars. Detectives sifted through fragmented glass and bullet paths, reconstructing the sequence second by second. Everything pointed to intent. Nothing about it was random. When the story reached local news, the city reacted with disbelief. Reporters called it one of the most senseless acts of violence the region had seen in years. Neighbors spoke of a man devoted to his children, the kind who offered help without being asked. To them, his death was more than a tragedy. It was a statement about what happens when good people stand against fear and corruption. The investigation that began that night would stretch for months. It would lead to grand jury indictments, sealed warrants, and a courtroom filled with the faces of three men accused of conspiring to silence a father. Yet long after the evidence was logged and the glass swept away, the image remained. A father at his own front door, standing for what was right, and paying the ultimate price for it. For those who knew him, that was a memory that refused to fade. Not the violence, not the crime scene, but the simple truth of who Kcoree Warren had been, a man who believed justice was worth defending, even when it came at a cost no one should ever have to bear. When investigators found the burned car in St. Louis the morning after the murder, they already suspected what it meant. Inside the twisted frame lay the body of Andrew Klaus, a man known to police, a name that had surfaced in the hours following Kcoree Warren's killing. The heat from the fire had warped the vehicle beyond recognition, but what remained inside told a story the killers hadn't intended to leave behind. Forensic teams uncovered a handgun grip half melted into the floorboard, its serial number erased by the flames. Ballistic testing confirmed it was the same weapon used to fire through the glass door of Warren's home. The discovery connected two crime scenes separated by only a few hours. It also revealed the desperation of the men who had arranged it. Klaus had done their bidding, and then they had destroyed him. Detectives began pulling at every loose thread. Cell tower data traced Lavor Harmon, Anthony L. Young, and Anthony D. Young moving along the same routes Klaus had taken that night. Their phones went dark at the same time as did. When they powered back on, the pings placed them miles away, near a rural area where the burning vehicle had been found. Surveillance footage showed a car registered to the Young family following Klaus's sedan through an intersection not long before the first gunshots on Lang Drive. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Each man had been in communication that evening, their messages growing shorter and more cryptic as the hours passed. When investigators finally retrieved those texts, the phrases were thinly coded, words like done, handled, and quiet. None of them mentioned Warren's name, but their timing matched every major event of that night. Money provided another link. Over several days in early July, nearly $12,000 had been withdrawn from accounts connected to Young's, broken into smaller transactions to avoid detection. That was the same amount Warren had been offered to abandon the sexual assault case against Harmon. After the murder, deposits and cash movements stopped altogether, as if the accounts themselves had gone silent. One of the Young's vehicles drew further attention. The license plates had been removed, and the identification number on the frame had been partly ground away. Traces of fuel and melted plastic lined the trunk. Chemical fingerprints that matched the accelerant used in Klaus's destroyed car. The evidence began to align piece by piece, forming a chain that led straight back to Harmon's circle. The prosecution's theory was grimly logical. Harmon, already charged with raping Warren's daughter, faced the collapse of his life if the case went to trial. When Warren refused a bribe, Harmon turned to his relatives for help. They brought in Klaus to carry out the shooting, promising payment once it was finished. When Warren lay dead, the same men silenced Klaus to erase the last witness and burned the car to bury the weapon. By early October, detectives had enough to bring the file to prosecutors. It was hundreds of pages long. Interviews, phone logs, surveillance records, autopsy results, and forensic analyses. Every strand pointed to deliberate planning. On October 29, 2025, a St. Louis County grand jury issued indictments charging Harmon and both Youngs with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of armed criminal action, tampering with evidence, and knowingly exploding or burning. Harmon also faced statutory rape and 3 counts of statutory sodomy tied to the assault on Warren's daughter. Chief Troy Doyle called the case calculated, cruel, and personal. Reporters who covered the press conference noted the weight in his tone. It was more than the arrest of 3 men. It was the exposure of a system of intimidation that reached into a family and ended with a father's death. Each defendant was held on a $2 million bond. Harmon remained in county custody. The Youngs were transferred from federal detention. Prosecutors said the evidence already met the threshold for murder, but might later expand to include a murder-for-hire charge. The legal machinery began to move, slow but certain, toward trial. For Ferguson residents, the indictments brought a fragile sense of justice. They left flowers outside the Warren home and lit candles on the steps. The doorway had been repaired, but the bullet holes lived on in memory. People spoke of him quietly, of a man who loved his children and refused to be bought. They wondered how anyone could punish integrity so violently. Within the police department, detectives kept returning to a single fact. Every attempt to erase the crime had instead exposed it further. The burning car, the scattered cash withdrawals, the cell phone data, all were traces left by men who thought they could make the truth disappear. Instead, their cover-up had preserved it. As the year drew toward its close, the case moved into the courts, but the meaning of it had already settled in the community. Kcoree Warren's story had become more than evidence in an indictment. It was a measure of courage and a warning about the cost of silence. What began as a cover-up had ended as testimony, a record of one father's refusal to surrender the truth, no matter who tried to bury it. By November 2025, nearly 4 months after the killing, Ferguson still carried the quiet weight of what had happened on Lang Drive. The porch lights on that street burned a little longer now, left on through the night. Families who once left doors unlocked started checking them twice. And though the investigation had brought answers, the air of loss remained. At the center of it all was a man most people in the community hadn't known by name until he was gone. Kcoree Warren was not a politician, not a public figure. He was a father who believed that truth mattered, that doing what was right, no matter how uncomfortable, was the only way to protect his child. When he walked into the Ferguson Police Department months earlier to report the rape of his daughter, he could not have imagined that decision would end his life. But he made it anyway. The charges now filed against Lavor Harmon, Anthony L. Young, and Anthony D. Young read like the anatomy of a betrayal. Prosecutors allege Harmon, the man Warren had once trusted around his family, sought to erase accountability with money, then with violence. When the bribe failed, the plan became a killing. When the killing was done, they erased the hitman who had carried it out. That night in July revealed not just the cruelty of the crime, but the courage of the victim. Warren could have taken the money, could have looked the other way, could have convinced himself that silence was safer. Instead, he chose principle. He chose his daughter's voice over his own safety. His refusal became the hinge on which the case turned, the one act that would later expose every person responsible for conspiracy. In the weeks after the indictments, local reporters revisited his story. They spoke with neighbors who remembered him fixing cars in his driveway, with co-workers who described him as reliable and kind. Every account painted the same picture: a man with little interest in drama or attention, who loved his children more than anything. He had no enemies, no debts, no hidden life. The only conflict he carried was the one he refused to ignore: the assault that had torn into his family. Ferguson Police Chief Troy Doyle described Warren as a man who did everything we ask citizens to do: report the crime, cooperate with investigators, tell the truth. The implication behind those words was sobering. Even doing everything right had not been enough to protect him. That realization rippled through the community. Churches organized vigils. Parents attended safety meetings, and counselors offered support to victims of assault who feared coming forward. The case itself became a mirror, reflecting how fragile justice can feel in the face of intimidation. For the detectives who worked it, Warren's murder was a reminder of why witness protection exists, of how quickly fear can destroy trust in institutions meant to defend the innocent. They knew that solving the crime wouldn't erase what had been lost, but it could reaffirm something larger: that silence, however violent its enforcement, could not win. The trial is still to come. The defendants maintain their innocence, and the courts will determine guilt or acquittal. But regardless of the verdicts, the story of Kcoree Warren has already taken on a shape larger than the crime itself. It is the story of a father who refused to trade integrity for safety, who believed his daughter deserved justice, and who held that belief until his last breath. For those who pass by his home today, there are reminders everywhere: the repaired door, the candle wax on the sidewalk, the hand-drawn notes left by neighbors' children. One reads simply, "Thank you for being brave." His courage forced light into a place built on secrecy. It revealed the cost of truth in a world where doing the right thing can make you a target. Yet it also showed something enduring: that conviction, once spoken, cannot be erased by violence. The prosecutors have said this case will likely take years to conclude, but for the family, the sentence began long before the courtroom. They live each day with the echo of that night, the sound of shattering glass, the unanswered question of what might have been. And yet, even through grief, there is pride that when confronted with fear, their father stood firm. In the end, that may be the lasting record of the case. Not the indictments, not the trials, but the simple truth of who Kcoree Warren was. A man who chose his child's safety over his own, who would not be silenced, and whose courage continues to speak long after his voice was taken. What began as a killing meant to bury the truth has instead immortalized it. The cover-up failed, and the silence it tried to impose has become a testament. For Ferguson, for the courts, and for every parent who has ever faced the impossible, his name now carries a weight all its own, a reminder that justice, though fragile, is worth every risk it demands.